Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 385 featuring Mathew Giampa, who is a head creative and VFX supervisor at Scanline in Montreal. Mathew is a very interesting person. I had never met Mathew before, so it was cool talking to him. Obviously, we've worked with the Scanline people for a long time, so it was cool sort of talking to him about that and about the inner workings of Scanline and sort of seeing all the really cool stuff that he's been doing over in their Montreal office. Kristen, what did you think of Mathew?
Yeah, this podcast is awesome. Mathew's career kind of has taken him a lot of places, and he started off as a compositor and now a VFX supervisor. And he's just like the films he's worked on, just like everything from Journey to the Center of the Earth, Sucker Punch, Black Widow, and Joker, and Cowboy Bebop, which was amazing. And it just has so many cool ones in the workings now. But he also kind of talked about how I liked you guys talking about the invisible visual effects and how he actually likes that more than just like kind of creating something crazy and obscure because there's no reference. It's the invisible things that are actually like, oh, I had no idea. So that was fun to hear about. And then also, as you said, this podcast kind of gives us knowledge about Scanline's inner workings and then the transition when they were bought by Netflix, kind of also how they're working from home and how it's actually kind of harder right now with the junior artists to analyze their work because everyone is working from home. It's just hard to give certain reviews back. So that was an interesting take. It was, we haven't really heard that for a while on the podcast. So yeah, it's just a lot of good information in this.
Yeah, it's really good. It's good to talk to him and sort of get his feelings about everything that's going on over at Scanline. I was just really fascinated by some of that work. And yes, I'm a huge fan of invisible effects. If people don't know that you did something, then you've won. Then that's kind of the cool thing that is interesting about it. Okay, we've got a couple of big announcements. The first one is that V-Ray 6 is out. V-Ray 6 for Max is out. And before you start asking when it's going to be available for Maya or Houdini or whatever, don't worry. They are all coming out eventually. But the schedule is actually pretty quick, so you should start seeing some of the other releases coming out. But for V-Ray 6, we've added a bunch of cool new things. We've added V-Ray Chaos Scatter to it, so you can scatter stuff all over the place. V-Ray decals on displacements, proxies, have object hierarchy, new cloud system for the sky, lots and lots and lots of stuff. So go check it out at chaos.com, V-Ray 6 for 3ds Max. Events. We've got a couple events going on. Kristen, what's going on?
Yeah, so you can find these out at chaos.com/events. We actually have two on July 28th. One is a free webinar, and it is about creating detailed exteriors in no time with V-Ray 6. So that's a fun one. And then another one on July 28th is the Chaos Campus Live Show, which will be episode 5. And Nikos and Georgie Zekov will be deep diving into Chaos Phoenix and life in CG. So do not forget to check those out.
Perfect. Remember, again, that is chaos.com/events for all the deets on that. But if people want to know more about the podcast, where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast and chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. And of course, if you have suggestions or questions or anything you'd like to contact us with directly, you can just go our email is labs@chaos.com. And don't forget to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it. But for now, please enjoy episode number 385 with Mathew Giampa.
Welcome to another CG Garage where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passe. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Well, thank you so much, Mathew. I appreciate you being on, and I appreciate I really am looking forward to hearing all of your stories and to hear more about what's going on over at Scanline. But let's start, before we do that, let's start a little bit about from you, like what sort of got you into either computer graphics or the film industry, or what was the thing that sort of motivated you, that got you into your career, or was it completely by accident?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you having me join. I kind of fell into it in a sense. Growing up, my family had a computer at home, and I started to kind of play around with it when I was a kid, going through high school, and starting to kind of do things with it was just actually MSPaint, kind of just drawing stuff and doing some school project stuff, and I never really kind of thought about getting into a career with art or anything along those lines, but I finished high school, and my mom gave me a phone call once, and she was working at a college. At the time, it was called the Art Institute of Vancouver, Burnaby. And she said, "Hey, I'm working somewhere that might be of interest to you, and you should come and check it out." So I did, and kind of the rest is history. I went to school there, and I worked hard at school. I fell in love with what it was, and I just started working in the industry.
Okay, well, that's pretty amazing. So what was some of your first job like? What was your in to get into a job?
Yeah, so at the time, I was living in Vancouver, and it was pretty challenging at the time to get into the industry. There wasn't a whole lot of jobs.
What year was this around?
At the time. This is around 2006.
Okay.
So things were starting to ramp up in Vancouver, but they weren't quite there yet, and so most of the stuff was actually happening still in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. So it was a situation where it's the people you kind of know that can kind of help you get in. I was lucky enough that out of school I kind of got a contact from one of my teachers, and it was to go work on a very small show called 3 Moons Over Milford.
Okay.
Something that most people probably have never heard of. There's only one season of it.
Okay.
But it actually was surprisingly a really, really great opportunity for me. I was working with a guy named John Gadecki, which is pretty well known in the industry. Mm-hmm. I'm sure most people would kind of know his name at some point or another. He's been around for a while. We were working in a small kind of office space. It was sort of on set. So he kind of took me on set and kind of showed me what they were doing and how things work, because I was so new.
That's amazing. A lot of people don't get to be on set that early.
No, absolutely. And so I was very, very privileged to be able to kind of go on set and kind of see how they were doing things. And he actually really kind of helped me out with a lot of things. He kind of showed me past projects and like the bidding packages and how they kind of did stuff.
Wow.
And yeah, he really got to show me a lot of the ropes in the industry, and it was really interesting to see. And he was a very hard guy. He would tell you how he sees it, and he would be hard on you, but it was a really, really awesome experience, and that was kind of my first in the industry, and I worked with him for 6 months. And yeah, it was a really great experience. I was really, really fortunate to be able to kind of start my career with him.
That's an amazing mentor for sure. I mean, you get to see a lot of things that people don't get to see for a couple of years out of their industry, right?
Absolutely.
So most of the times you're just shoved into a dark corner and figure it out on your own, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of that as well. He was a pretty busy guy because he was on-set supervisor, but then he was also just kind of doing the post with just a very small crew. There was like 4 of us that were kind of working together. And so he's like, yeah, here's a shot board, go nuts. And I'm like, I don't even know what any of this is at first. You know what I mean?
Right,
so I was like,
oh.
So we did that. And then once they wrapped up filming, we actually moved into a small, it was an apartment space that was just above a garage. And it was the middle of summer in Vancouver, and it must have been to finish that show. So isn't it?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so what company did you say this was from?
So it was actually not like it wasn't really a company. It was 3 Moons Over Milford. It was actually a show where John was doing the visual effects supervising on set, but then he also had his own small...
Oh, so for the show itself.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, got it.
So he put everything together, and then he closes it down once the show was over, and then he moves on to something else afterwards. So yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, that was my start.
All right. Yeah, that's a very unusual. I mean, I know obviously a couple companies that sort of do that things. I know Uncharted Territory sort of ramps up and ramps down in some cases, but I think it's interesting to see a VFX studio operate much more like an art department in some ways.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, cool. Okay, so that is definitely a plethora of experience in your first 6 months in the industry. How did you migrate that into something else? Where did you go from there?
Yeah, so basically after that kind of all transpired, I got contacted by some people over at a company called Frantic Films. I'm not sure if you...
Oh, I know Frantic.
Yeah, so way back in the day. And so I...
Down in Los Angeles? Or?
No, actually it was up in Vancouver.
Oh, right, that's right.
Yeah, so their original office was in Winnipeg, and then I think they moved down to Los Angeles as well, and then eventually they started opening up a shop over in Vancouver, and so I was still over there at the time, and I got contacted to see if I was interested in coming over there and helping them with, I think it was White Noise 2 was I think that was the first project that I was starting on. So I said yes to it. And it was a pretty great experience. It was White Noise 2, and then it kind of transitioned into Journey to the Center of the Earth, the original one.
Yeah, I remember they worked on that.
Yeah, so I worked on that. There was a lot of long days and sleeping under the desks for those ones, trying to complete it. But again, really, really good mentor. Shane Davidson was my comp soup for that when I was there, and I owe a lot to him for what he kind of did for me when I was there. He definitely showed me the ropes, and it was kind of a funny experience. The first time I met him, he kind of came back from vacation, and he came back early to kind of help out to finish White Noise 2. And he wasn't really happy about it because he's coming back early from vacation that he was supposed to have, and he kind of looked over at me and he's like, "Who are you?" And I was like, "Oh, my name's Matt. I'm a new compositor." And I was like, he's like, "Okay," and he's like, I just asked him, like, "Would you like to see like my reel or anything?" I'm still new and young in the industry, and so I asked him that, and he looked at me. He's like, "No, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to tell pretty quickly if you're good or not," and walked away. But sure enough, we became pretty close, and I ended up becoming staff over at Frantic Films. So I guess it kind of worked out in my favor.
Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah, that's pretty. Yeah, it can be a little intimidating, I'm sure, especially being a little junior as you are, and some guy comes like, "What's going on?"
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, no, it was a really great opportunity there too, and I got the chance to kind of work with a lot of people that I still kind of see once in a while in the industry in different different areas. Today still. So you kind of, get a good friendship from back then that still exists, 10 years later, 12 years later.
Sure. So how long were you at Frantic?
Yeah, so I was there through the transition when Prime Focus actually bought them out. Yep. So I was there through that, and I stayed for about 5 years. And then one of my last major shows was pretty much Sucker Punch, which was supervised by Brian Hirota. Who I actually work with today still over here at Scanline. And so I stayed there for about 5 years. And then I worked on Sucker Punch with Brian, and he ended up going back to Los Angeles, and he kind of contacted me and said he needed some help over at Pixomondo in LA, and he was wondering if I was interested in coming down to LA. And as a 22-year-old kid, I was like, "Yep, sure, why not? Let's go down south and see what it's like over in in Hollywood." And so I ended up making the transition after that over to Pixomondo down in LA.
Okay. Yeah, so you were down. What were you working on when you came to Pixo?
Yeah, so at first I was working on Green Lantern, so I was helping him with that. And then, ironically enough, I actually transitioned into my first comp supervisory role on Journey to the Center of the Earth 2. So,
right.
So I kind of got my start on a film with Journey, and then supervising was kind of Journey. So it was kind of an interesting thing that kind of transpired there. So I jumped onto that, and I did Journey 2 there, and then I ended up actually transferring over to Rhythm and Hues for 6 months. After that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So this was towards the end. Were you on Life of Pi?
Actually, Life of Pi was just ending, and then I started working on Snow White and the Seven Huntsmen there for a couple months, and then after that, there was I was in conversations with them to stay, but things were a little bit interesting at that time over at Rhythm and Hues. They were going through the bankruptcy and everything. So I ended up going back to Pixomondo for Star Trek Into the Darkness. And
Yep.
I did that one for a year there, and then after that, that's when I ended up transitioning over to Scanline, which I've been to.
The Scanline. Did you go to Scanline in Los Angeles, or did you go to?
No,
Vancouver?
I actually started in LA. So I was at the
Okay.
LA facility for I think I was there from 2013 till 2016. So I was there for 3 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What was your first film at Scanline?
It was 300, the sequel to 300. I can't
right.
remember the full title
Yep.
name of it, but yeah.
Right,
So
right,
yeah,
right.
that was my first experience, and then I moved on to what was the next one that I worked on? I'm trying to remember. There's so many projects in between.
You worked at Scanline for quite a while.
Yeah,
so
it's been almost 9 years now, so it's been a lot. But
right. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
lot.
yeah. So, but yeah, I can't remember what actually. I apologize. I'm kind of blanking on
That's
what
okay.
the actual next show.
Did you work
was.
with Greg Satilis at all?
I have worked with them a bit, yeah, for sure. So,
Okay.
but yeah,
And Brian Grill. I'm
Brian
sure.
Grill. I actually my first show
Yeah.
with Brian Grill was San Andreas.
Oh, that's a great
Yeah,
show.
so we were in the trenches together on that one. That was a real grind of a project, but it was a lot of fun. And
Uh-huh.
Brian Grill's a really fun guy, awesome guy to work with.
Oh, he's one of my favorite people in the industry. I work with him on Day After Tomorrow.
Oh, nice.
I did so many. Yeah. So I was with him while he was still at DD, and he's a wonderful person.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's been at Scanline for a long time. Now, so that's really great.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
I think obviously being nominated recently and everything, I was really
Yep.
happy to see that for him, and he's always a very fun, positive guy. Really happy, really great to hang out with.
Oh yeah, he's like a big teddy bear.
That's the best way to describe it for sure.
Yeah, he's amazing, and it's really great. I mean, it's been so wonderful to see all these incredible things coming from Scanline, all this incredible talent that's been happening for a long time. And obviously, he said, you've been there for 9 years, so obviously you're seeing the benefits of that as being a nice, good home for you. I mean, obviously there must have been at some point he was like, hey, that's an opportunity to go back to Vancouver.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Having
It.
So what motivated that?
Yeah, it was just looking for a life change. I had been down in LA for about 4 years after that, or I guess it was 6 years. I was there for about 6 years in LA, and I love LA.
Mm-hmm.
LA was really great, but I just felt like it was time for a change, and I was kind of missing some aspects to being home. I'm a pretty big in outdoors kind of stuff, so like hiking and camping and kayaking and all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of missing a lot of that being back home in Vancouver because it's so accessible there. So I ended up going back to Vancouver, and I was working there for I guess another 3 years, and then the opportunity to come out to Montreal came up when we decided to open up a facility.
So you're in Montreal now. I didn't realize.
Yeah. So I've bounced around on all the offices in North America so far.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I know.
So when did you go to Montreal?
I came out
What
here
year you
in
said?
2019.
Okay.
It was, I transitioned out once they opened up the facility. They were kind of looking for some help, just to make sure that they had somebody that they knew and trusted over here in Montreal. And I said that I'd be happy to take the opportunity and go see another city and see how it goes. And I've been here ever since.
And so 2019 was around the time that Scanline opened the Montreal
that's
office?
correct. Yeah. So.
Okay. And how has it been? Like, how was it? Obviously there was a big transition, a lot of moves, and a lot of talent. I mean, how big is the office now in Montreal?
I would have to double check on what exactly the number is now, but I think we're around 150 people. So
okay.
but
yeah. So not
no,
small.
we were actually slightly bigger than that too before the pandemic, and so I think we were around the 200 people mark. But yeah, I'd have to double check exactly what the number is again, because things have fluctuated so much because of the pandemic and shows and whatnot. So
How did the pandemic affect you guys?
So it was definitely an interesting situation for every facility, right? But it was something that Scanline was actually set up very well to transition to. So one of the things that Stefan had really originally done, the owner of Scanline, previous owner, now that it's been bought by Netflix, but our CEO,
We call him founder.
Yeah, that sounds like a good one. So he actually never had a setup where you would have a machine that you were working at your desk. It was all basically just PCO IP, and it was something that he had ever since I started at the facility. I think he's had that forever. So that was originally even down in LA. It was one of those things, and then once we transitioned into moving into Vancouver and then here in Montreal, it just made that transition easier to basically just open up shop because everything was still in LA, and then we just worked PCOIP. And so when the pandemic hit, we got some phone calls, obviously, from clients and stuff like that, and they were asking us kind of, what's the plan for working through the pandemic? And, fortunately enough, like we were able to say, like, it's easy for us to be able to transfer everybody working from home because we have a secure network that we currently work at, and we don't have machines at the office, so we can actually transfer people home and work from home if that's what's needed. And we were able to quickly transition into that. Clients were pretty happy about that, the fact that we were able to do that so quickly, because a lot of facilities, I think, kind of scrambled to try to figure out how to make that work. And
I've heard that a few times, but I'm wondering, like, how did they respond, or how did Scanline even respond to the fear of the social leaking, right? Like if someone's behind you, or
absolutely,
your spouse says something or whatever is going on.
It's really funny because it was one of those things where originally that was such a big thing with security, right? And that's why you always had to go to an office, and nobody ever really wanted anybody working from home unless there was like strict guidelines that they had to abide by, locked doors, no windows, et cetera, et cetera. And for the most part, it's still the case that we still have specific things that we have to make sure that we go by. Like we can't have like windows in the rooms and stuff like that. And so, but it was funny because their fear of that kind of went away when they realized that their shows might not get finished in time. So we kind of it transitioned from we don't want this to happen because we're fearing that people will leak stuff, to how are we going to get the show done? What is your plan? And it's like, we can have people working from home. Right. You're like, okay, great. And then the fear kind of went away. But I think
what's amazing is that it went away across the entire industry in some ways, and nothing really.
No,
leaked.
Exactly. And I think that, you can kind of credit that to remote work, the way that we have it set up, where people aren't taking the actual physical work back home. So you can't just plug in, a USB key and take whatever you have and then, leak it. So, I mean, I guess you could theoretically kind of just film something with your camera or something like that and leak it. But it just, I would agree with you. I'm very, very surprised that nothing really did get leaked over this time, because there's a lot of people working from home now. But I think it was actually a really good test for the industry too, to see if it's a possible thing to do, because you have so much talent, so many different places around the world, and having to try to relocate all the time just to work for your facility is always a challenge. So I think that it was a good test, and it proved to be really successful, and it gave us now the ability to be able to hire worldwide and not have to require people to come to a specific location to work. And so it kind of broadens our, our horizons to be able to hire more people in different areas. So.
Yeah, for sure. And what are your thoughts about, the fact that, obviously you're in Vancouver and Montreal for specific tax reasons now. What does that imply for remote work and people working from anywhere? Does that imply that they can work in the Montreal office and still be in New York or wherever else they want?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that I know the logistics of the tax credits and everything, because that's something that there's another department for. But for the most part, so from my understanding, it's obviously there's still, for the tax incentives, say, for example, in Montreal, you have to be a citizen of Quebec to be able to qualify for those tax incentives for those people. And so obviously there's things that we have to kind of work around with those type of logistics, but there's tax incentives in so many different cities and countries now that I think that you can kind of work it. So it's okay, well, there's tax incentives here and there's tax incentives here, and this is where these kind of work. And so we can kind of work it based off of obviously needs on shows and what shows requirements are for those tax incentives. So it's definitely a little bit more challenging, but prime example is like there's tax incentives in Toronto or Ontario compared to Vancouver to here, Georgia.
Yeah, but you could hire a couple people in Ontario and still get those tax
exactly.
incentives, right?
So there's still ways to be able to kind of do it. And I know that like the UK has good tax incentives as well. And we obviously have an office there now too. But so there is still a need to be in certain locations, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a location where Scanline has an office or a facility.
Sure.
So.
Sure. I think that's really interesting. I think, I think that there has been some interesting disruptions with the work from home situation in the industry. And I think it's really interesting to see what are the benefits for people and how people are justifying it. I think obviously there's some challenges as well. Like what were some of the challenges for you? In the Montreal office, obviously you weren't there very long before they shut down everything and you can't be at people's desks anymore. So how did that work for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely had its challenges, right? Because it's nice to be able to just go to somebody's desk and have a conversation with them, see what they're doing, and, talk to them about stuff and give them direct feedback. Whereas now you kind of have to basically pick up a phone and call them and say, hey, how's it going? What are you working on? And figure that stuff out.
Right.
I thought that transition was going to be a little bit more difficult than what it actually was. I was pretty surprised, especially at the beginning. There was definitely a lot of people that were working still very hard at home, and it was easy to kind of communicate still. And Scanline has a software that's called iLine that we use for meetings and reviewing and everything as well. So that makes things a lot easier for reviews, and it's just all kind of remote now. But the one thing that I would say that has been really, really difficult, and we're starting to see a lot more now, is we're starting to kind of get out of the pandemic and seeing about having people coming into the office is like you have a lot of these younger kind of people coming in that may not necessarily have as much of experience as some of the other people that have been in the industry for years that aren't able to just have that conversation with their the person they're sitting next to saying, hey, I'm having difficulties with this, what would you do to kind of fix this, or whatever the case may be. Like you actually have to physically pick up the phone, but if you don't know anybody that you're necessarily working with because you've never met them, the chances of you picking up that phone and asking them is very slim, and I think that's really challenging for like new people getting into the industry with everybody working from home. And then there's also just the fact that as a supervisor, there's sometimes where you might be working with somebody, and be like, oh, this person's actually like a lot more advanced than I thought they might be. And you can kind of see it with your interactions at the office, whereas if they're working from home, you don't really see a lot of it and you don't really talk to them as much. And then you just see what they're producing, but you don't know how long it's taken. You don't know how they got there or whatever the case may be. And so it's a little bit harder to kind of analyze how good somebody's been doing or whatever the case may be. And people that might need to, you'd be like, hey, this person's really improved and we should definitely get them onto this next show because they're great at this, and or whatever the case may be. And so it's been a challenge that I've been trying to think of how to kind of resolve. And I think one of the things that we would love to do is try to encourage people to come back into the office. Like, I don't think we're going to ever require people to come back to the office. I think it's more, we like the remote work, but I think we're going to encourage people to come in once a week, once a month or something, just to kind of get familiarized with the people that you're working with and, feel more comfortable about just picking up the phone and contacting somebody that you might know and you've become friendly with and say, hey, I'm having troubles with it. You might help me out with it. And I think that's one of the ways we're going to do that. Right. But I think that's probably been the biggest challenge when it comes to working remotely.
I think you're right. I've heard it from several people that junior guys are the ones that are suffering. They're not getting the experience of the interacting with people or the ability to ask for help the same way is very challenging.
100%. Right? And it's kind of unfortunate. And I think there's something to be said about that kind of like environment that we used to work in, where it's like you're going for reviews or dailies in the theater room where you have the big projector and everyone's kind of sitting there and you're having discussions about shots and people are allowed to kind of give their input and feedback on certain things and what their thoughts are on it. And you still get a little bit of it because we're all on calls, but you just don't get the same type of environment because you're looking at it on a monitor rather than a big screen or projected.
How has that been? I mean, you're obviously a big comp guy, and when you're looking in the screening room and calibrated color or some kind of other, like, what has been your challenge of looking at things on a monitor at home compared to
okay, so I might get in trouble for saying this because I think I'm a little bit different than a lot of people, but to me, the calibrated monitor and working in the dark that we used to do back in the day, I think was a bit overrated. Honestly, I think a lot of it, as long as you're kind of matching colors, like, you know, one way or another, if a client says something's too blue, but on your screen it may not look that blue, if you look at your values and if they're saying that they feel like it's too blue, then you just shift a little bit of blue out of it and you can adjust and tweak accordingly. You know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, I think there's definitely a value in seeing things with a calibrated, you know, monitor or a projector that's calibrated to see it how it's supposed, like, truly should be seen. But I think that there's a lot that can be done with it, with, you know, even just the monitors that you have. Granted, we do have calibrated monitors and everything. Obviously, we have the Dreamcolor monitors at home while we're reviewing stuff, and so we are seeing it hopefully in proper color. But yeah, I just...
You don't have someone coming by and knocking on your door.
No, you definitely don't anymore. And so, yeah, But I think the biggest challenge with it is always, like, you know, your Dreamcolor monitor is a 24-inch monitor, right? And you know, I've kind of set myself up so that I can kind of switch over to a 65-inch television, so at least I can see it larger. Because I think one of the more challenging things, surprisingly, is less of the color and all that kind of stuff. It's more of, like, just picking up on things like maybe a bad roto shape, or, you know, something doesn't look right over here, but you just don't see it because it's smaller than what you typically final things with. So I think that's where the biggest challenge came in. And then, you know, looking at a TV, obviously you're not going to ever get your television calibrated properly enough to judge color on that.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, obviously you guys are doing a lot of streaming stuff as well that's happening where everyone is, right? And a lot of things that's going on TV. And you know, all these TVs are all have HDR mode, and everyone's got whatever color, most of them poor choices.
Yes,
in
very poor choices.
Frame count. Put in my color in vivid. You know, like,
yeah, exactly.
So but it's really hard. I mean, to sort of, like, think about, like, you know, because I knew that when I was first in the industry, I was still doing film back then, right? So we knew exactly, okay, it's film, it's got this range in the theater, it's going to look like this. After, when it goes to TV, it doesn't matter, you know, I don't care anymore. But nowadays, it's like kind of all over the place. So it's got to be a challenge to sort of think about colors.
Yeah, it really is. And you know, I kind of wonder about things too a lot of times, where a lot of people are just looking at it, like you said, on these televisions with different colors, and it's like vivid mode, and they have these like true motion settings, like all this crazy stuff. And, you know, I thought about it and I was like, well, whatever I see and agree that I think that looks right, I bet you everyone's going to see it completely differently once we put it into streaming, if it's not a film that's going to theaters. So, you know, obviously the color still matters and everything along those lines, but it definitely seems like a different environment when it comes to how you're color correcting stuff, or how things look visually to you, because that people aren't going to see it that way. They're going to see it a very different way because of their television. But
well, as a cinephile, I'm just happy to, like, there's streaming networks that will, if they have something in their good color, they actually force your TV to go to cinema mode, like, or to or direct. I think it's called, I forgot. There's a specific mode that was developed that Tom Cruise, believe it or not, was one of the people championing this mode. It's a TV. Yeah, it takes your TV to the proper frame rate and the proper dynamic range and, you know, colors, which to most people looks too warm and too dark. But it's great. And then you can say, oh, finally, I can see, you know, Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because a lot of times, you know, you get a new television or something. I've had the same thing where you get it at first and you're like, I'll calibrate it later. I'm not, you know, I might not have time. You start watching it for a little while. And even for sports, like seeing things bright and stuff is kind of nice. But then, you kind of like, okay, I'm going to do a calibration on my television and put it in cinema mode. And you look at it, you're like, oh, man, this looks so different. It's so warm. So I bet at the same time, like, once you start to get used to it, you're like, yeah, this looks more natural and correct for what it should be, you know?
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know that, you know, that was the case. And I didn't know that.
I think it's called creators mode, or I forgot what it's called. I'm blanking.
I'll definitely have to look that up myself too. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. It's cool. Okay, so let's talk about some of your more recent projects at Scanline and some of the things you worked on in the since you've moved to Montreal, what are some of the big things? That you've worked on?
Actually, that's a really good question. So once I came out here, I got really lucky. I got my first opportunity to be a VFX supervisor. And it was on The Joker actually, which. Yeah, I was really excited about that one when they asked me if I was interested in doing it, and we did it all in house here in Montreal, and it was a really great experience. I had a lot of fun, and I was really fortunate to have that as my first opportunity to supervise. Obviously, because I got a lot.
What were some of the things that you guys were doing?
Yeah, so it wasn't anything too crazy. So it was a lot of set extensions and just kind of cleanup work and adding things like graffiti and all that kind of stuff. There was very little 3D that was involved in it. There definitely was some, but it was pretty minimal. So it was kind of a little bit more orientated to my background of compositing. And so that kind of worked out in my favor, I think. But yeah, like... Obviously, some of the extensions, they were some of it was 3D, but then a lot of it was just like paint over with DMP, and it was a lot of invisible effects. You weren't supposed to know about it, and
I think those are some of the most underrated things that happen, for sure. And it sounds to me like Scanline, it was not by accident that they decided we'll make him a VFX supervisor on something that is totally
I'm pretty sure they were pretty smart. Actually, I give them a lot of credit because they've picked a lot of projects for me that were like, okay, we're going to start you off with what you know, and then it's like, okay, we're going to dip you a little bit more into stuff that you may be a little bit less familiar with, or obviously I'm familiar with like 3D and stuff because we've done so much visual effects stuff here. But it's like my background's just not 3D, so eventually they gave me a little bit more and a little bit more, and it's kind of just progressed. And as long as I continued to achieve what they needed, they kept on seeming to give me more, with 3D aspects to it. So I've been really fortunate. They were they kind of slowly put me into the role rather than just dumping something big on me and saying figure it out. So I'm really appreciative of that. So just to make sure that it would work out, because if it didn't work out, you're like, okay, maybe we shouldn't do this anymore and just go back to being comp supervisor.
Right. No, well, I'm sure. I've seen some incredible growth and talent from Scanline, and I think I definitely know they know how to maximize the best talent out of their people. So that's definitely a true statement. So, but going back a little bit, actually, I'm fascinated. What got you into compositing? Like when you started going to school, back then. I know we're going back a long time. Why did you say I want to do compositing?
You know what? I didn't actually choose compositing originally. Like I basically went to see a counselor at the school. And he's like, what do you kind of like to do? And I was like, well, I don't know. Like, I like to I did some painting and drawing in school, or like in high school. I did a little bit of like digital stuff on the computer, but it was, just kind of putting things together in Photoshop and stuff. And then they kind of looked at it and they said, you know what, we're going to put you in compositing for visual effects and film, or TV and film. And I was like, yeah, sure. And then I got into it. And then, most people, like in that, especially...
Did you not know really know,
to be honest with you. Back then, basically what everyone kind of talks about is animation, right? It's animation, Pixar, and all this kind of stuff. So when you're a kid that doesn't know anything about the industry, a lot of you're just thinking animation. That's kind of the only thing you kind of think of, right? And then... started going to school. We got a bit of, training on things like Maya and stuff like that back in the day, and doing a little bit of animation and a little bit of modeling, lighting, rendering, and texturing and stuff. But it was very heavily focused on compositing, and I actually just enjoyed it. And I looked at what animation was and stuff, and it just really wasn't an interest to me. And so, I kind of just fell into it. I don't know how else to really put it. It's not the most exciting reasons, but
I disagree. I think compositing is an incredible talent, and it's a lot, and especially if you look at what you did on The Joker, it's like that's the magic of compositing, is how good you can make it so no
I definitely lean more towards like the invisible visual effects. I like stuff where it's like, this is what it needs to look like, just make it look that way. A lot of times where it's like, let's do something crazy and creative and wild. It's like, okay, like I'm happy to do that kind of stuff, and it's fun at times, but it's just not as grounded. So there's so many different opinions on what it should look like, and it's kind of arbitrary, you know what I mean? And it's to what somebody else thinks looks good, not necessarily what actually does. Whereas, you know, if you have a physical object that you have to match to, it's like, well, there's no questioning what it is. It just needs to look like that, you know? So yeah, so I definitely like that kind of aspect about it before, a lot better. So yeah, I did Joker, and yeah, and then after that I got the opportunity to work on Black Widow, actually.
Okay.
So I was I had to go on set while I was still working on the Joker for Black Widow.
Oh wow!
Over in the UK, and yeah, I got.
Was that's not the first time you were on set since? No,
actually, it was actually.
Really?
It was a long time in between actually being on set again. So yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, and I had to prepare myself for it, and I was also kind of still in the mode of trying to final, the stuff for Joker. And so it's like I worked literally until 2 a.m. on Joker. I went straight to the airport, and I got onto a plane, and I went straight over to the UK, and I met up with the client over there at I think it was around 6:30 their time, but like I had to stay up, and then I was with them until about 9:30, 10, and then I had to go back to the hotel, which was 2 hours away from where they were on set, and filming, and then I had to review a bunch of stuff for the Joker that night. So I think I was up for about 36 or 38 hours straight just to get through that. So it's
wow.
Yeah, it was it was a really fun experience. You know, honestly, as crazy as sometimes the hours could be in that kind of stuff, I'm more than happy to do it, because it just it keeps you busy too, right?
Sure. So what was some of the stuff that you did on Black Widow?
Yeah, so a lot of it, again, was set extension stuff. So we did a whole environment. So we did the bridge sequence. I'm not sure if you actually seen the show.
Yeah.
So the Taskmaster reveal, I guess, essentially, when she fought Taskmaster on the bridge. So we had to come up with the entire environment that was that was supposed to be just in Norway. So we created a 3D environment. The whole thing was completely 3D. It was 360 degrees. You could fly anywhere in it. And then they had a big chunk of the bridge built on set over in London, and then we had to do an extension of it. And so we did that battle, and that was the big chunk of it. And we had to basically flip a car, make it explode, yeah. So that was that was pretty much most of it. We also did a little bit of set extension on the safe house, which was when she was in the trailer. So a lot of the background was all matte painting, and then we also had to kind of reduce the amount of fog they had in the plates and stuff like that. So it was again, it was a lot of like invisible, but there was a lot more effects and full CG that was in there.
Absolutely. I'll tell you. It's funny. I worked on The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, which also had a bridge sequence and a car flipping.
Great movie. I love that movie. That was really well done.
Good. And that was all done in CG as well, and people didn't even know it. And to me, that's exactly like that. The hide you get of like people don't even know that this is all CG is like the
absolutely. Like especially with the Joker. Again, going back to that, I got a lot of questions like, what did you guys even do? And I was like, well, this is all fake and this is all fake. And they're like, I never had any idea that was all fake. And so you're right. Like there's a lot of satisfaction in that. Whereas, as fun and as cool as some of these like, big Marvel movies can be, where you got like, crazy effects and like, stuff that's a little bit not realistic. There's just something to be said when somebody's like looks at it and like, I had no idea what you did there. That's really, really satisfying.
Yeah. I mean, I remembered it was, sort of going back to your story about rhythm and hues during the whole Life of Pi fiasco days, when the visual effects industry was suffering and they were, rebelling against the industry in a lot of ways. And then some people were responding, it's like, well, I don't really like CG. I don't like movies with CG. I prefer movies like Lincoln. And then someone responded with a picture of Lincoln in front of a giant green screen. Like, of course. Do you think he just teleported them to the past? No, that's all
Exactly.
CG behind them. So yeah, it was kind of interesting, and it's the same thing. Like, people don't realize how much of what they're seeing on TV is manufactured.
Yeah, it's amazing, and even shows that wouldn't even really necessarily require visual effects. Like, there's always a mic boom that needs to be removed, or something else that needs to be removed in shots that people just don't like, and coffee cups that should be removed in something like Game of Thrones.
Like in Game of Thrones. yeah, it's true. That's right, and it's so funny. Like, they actually removed it like the next week. It wasn't gone from the shot. And I was like, that is a strange.
100%. It's completely crazy. So
yeah. That's awesome. Okay, well, cool. Okay, so Black Widow was a great show as well. That was fun. And then what was your next supervisor?
Yeah, so I kind of co-visual effects supervised on Suicide Squad 2 through the pandemic. That was I finished up Black Widow at the beginning of the pandemic, and then we transferred over to Suicide Squad 2.
Right.
I was co-supervising with Brian Hirota on that one, actually. So I work closely with him, which I've done quite a bit in the past. We've worked together quite a lot. And so I did that show, and then after we finished that, I actually moved over onto Cowboy Bebop. Nice. That was my last one that I completed, and then I'm currently working on a new project right now, which not really quite able to say.
You're not ready to reveal. That's okay. We'll have to snoop around IMDb and see if any shit.
Yeah, I'm sure. But another new Netflix show that's coming out. I think it's going to be sometime next year or something along those lines, but I'm not totally sure exactly when it is. But
what was it like working on Cowboy Bebop?
It was very interesting. It was really it was a really cool show, and obviously there's a huge following with the anime, right? And one of the best animes I think that has been done. So it was really kind of exciting to try to work on that, and the client was really great. Obviously, working with Netflix, this was actually before we got purchased by them, that we were working on that. So it was a little bit of a different dynamic, but it was it was just a lot of fun. It was kind of a goofy show. With like some kind of crazy ideas, obviously, as you can see in the anime, and it was really nice too because they tried to keep true to the anime as much as they possibly could, and there was a lot of shots where you kind of looked at them and you're like, okay, like the framing is pretty much 1-to-1 with what the anime was, and it's like a lot of like very locked off cameras, which I was grateful for because things like tracking, roto, anything is a lot more easy when you don't have cameras going all over the place. So I kind of jumped on the opportunity to work on that, and I got to work with some really great people on it, and it was a lot of fun.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, I remember the anime when it came out. I was so excited about it, and then so it's really cool you got to work on that. Well, so obviously you can't talk about your newer project, but you did mention the Netflix thing. So when did that happen? Let people know a little bit about that, and what are some of your thoughts about that, the whole you guys being part of Netflix?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty exciting time for us. Obviously things were challenging through the pandemic and everything, and we didn't really know anything about it. And then I think it was, I'm trying to remember when it was actually announced, but there was a day, I think it was was it November? I think it was, I think it was November. We just got a random message from Stefan, and he was basically like, hey, we want a company-wide, meeting. And so everyone's like, well, that's kind of weird because we never have like company-wide meetings. We all jumped onto Eyeline, and he kind of announced to us that we were transitioning over to be part of Netflix team and their family. And it was a pretty exciting time. I think I think Stefan has done an awesome job with Scanline up to that point, and I think he just thought it was the right time to transition over to something, bigger. And we get a lot of support from Netflix, and I think that they really believed in his vision and where he wanted to take the company. And so they were pretty excited about it. And I think that it's been really good for us. I think in the long run, it's going to be a lot more stable. I feel like a little bit less now than it used to be, but the visual effects industry has always been a little bit unstable in terms of companies, and obviously, as you've seen as well, like DD going through different purchases, and Rhythm and Hues going under, DNEG being bought. So there's always some questionable things, and obviously there's always a little bit of, well, what does this really mean if you're getting purchased? But like, again, Netflix has been extremely supportive of Scanline, and they've kind of kept us as like our own separate entity. So we're still running as and operating as what we were before as Scanline. We just have a little bit more support from them, and obviously they will be able to feed us work if there's ever times that we're slow. And obviously, even when we're not slow, we're definitely going to be working on a lot of Netflix stuff, but we're also lucky that we're going to have the ability to work on shows from other facilities or studios as well. I think it was a really good thing. I'm pretty excited about the future with what they've been doing and what they've been kind of planning to do. It's been pretty good, but it's always a little bit, you always have those questions. I've been through the transition before, obviously when Frantic Films got bought by Prime Focus, and then being around, Rhythm and Hues around the time, it wasn't really a buyout, but it was, different, turn of events there. You kind of know that there's a lot of like uneasiness at the time, but again, I think that they did a really good job, and we've been growing still, and we've been looking at expanding some things and improving on network and facility wide things as well, with Netflix being a part of it now.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that did the big difference between that is that Scanline was purchased by Netflix at one of its highs, not
yes, absolutely, yes.
You know what I mean? So that makes a big difference, and that brings value to what you guys are doing. You mentioned Eyeline, but Eyeline sounds like it's a communication tool between that you guys use between your company, but you guys also have another company. Yes,
for sure.
Right?
So it's kind of, it's a branded thing with like what we kind of use, the software that we use internally to review stuff and have meetings and whatnot. But then there's also the Eyeline Studios, which is a virtual studio that Stefan had started to develop, which I think was also very exciting for Netflix when he was starting to do that. It's really cool. I haven't had a whole lot of experience in it yet because none of my shows have really utilized it, but I do know I've seen a lot of the work that they've been doing with it, and it's pretty impressive on what you can kind of accomplish with it. There's a lot of things that, like, prime example, it may sound a little bit crazy, but like a face replacement shot kind of thing, it's there's some things where you literally just can't have an actor do, and so you have to have the stunt double. But like, obviously, a lot of times doing a face replacement sort of thing is really challenging, but it's made it a lot easier with the virtual studio that we kind of have. So it's pretty impressive, and I think we'll be seeing a lot of stuff that's been coming out of it in the next probably year or so that will probably surprise some people, and I think it's a really cool technology to kind of see.
Well, as someone who sort of has the lens of a compositor and the way that you think about things, what are your thoughts about how the industry is utilizing virtual production and real-time technology?
I think that it's actually really impressive. It's definitely impressive too, because I know that back in the day, if you tried to do something similar, you'd always get that rear projection feel to it. But I think with these new LED screens that they have, and the technology they have, it really kind of eliminates that feeling. I think sometimes.
Sometimes I've seen it where it's very obvious.
And I think as long as you plan it right, like The Mandalorian looked phenomenal, and I think they utilized the technology very, very well. But I've also seen things in that. I mean, it's also.
I'm not going to name names, but there's been some shows like, are you kidding me?
And I think there's also a lot of challenges with it too, because like a prime example is, I guess, depth of field, right? it's you have a screen, and your camera can only capture to where that screen is, where you might need to capture even more, so your depth of field might be off or whatever the case may be. But it's really interesting too, because I know now, like, you can kind of develop an environment and then you can project it on these on the LED screens, and basically have like people act in front of it, and then you can still change it in post. It's a lot more kind of tedious work, because obviously you don't have a green screen to replace anymore, but the benefit you have in it is you're getting proper lighting from the environment onto those actors, and as long as you kind of keep true within like what that lighting environment is, I think it's so much more beneficial than having a blue screen or a green screen, because every time if you have proper lighting coming from above, from a sky or whatever the case may be, like before you'd have all this spill, then you have to get rid of the spill, but then you have to like try to blend in some of the color from the environment into it to try to make it look right, but you have weird set lighting that doesn't really match, and so now you're faking things in the background to kind of make it. It sometimes gets very messy if it wasn't planned out properly, and it always looks fake, if you don't get it right. And I think this really kind of helps eliminate a lot of that.
I've seen a lot of LED wall sort of demos or demonstrations from different places, and one of the things that they do is to have the whole environment except right in the frustum of the camera to put a green screen, so that they can put a higher quality background in there, but the subject gets all the lighting of the environment. But as a compositor, like, practically speaking, give me the honest truth, like, if that really works, you still have that edge of glow green.
Yes, it definitely does, for sure. So that is one of the problems you have, but the nice thing about it is you don't have just such a huge broad green screen that is just flooding your environment with green, right? Or blue. So if it's isolated, at least you're kind of isolating to one specific area, although unfortunately that's usually the focal point of whatever the shot is. And so, you still kind of have this combination.
Yeah, but you get a general lighting is better,
absolutely.
Much better.
So
than
I still think
right?
at the end of the day, it's significantly better than what you would get if you just put up a regular blue screen or green screen and said, yeah, we're going to film this, because you just don't get as much spill. But yeah, it still has its challenges, and you still have to try to do some manipulation to make it work, but definitely sits in a lot better than what it would otherwise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've been doing this for a long time. I mean, rear projections have been around for a long time, so this is just
it was really funny when I started to see like some of these companies starting to use it, and like the Mandalorian stuff. I'm like, man, like we're going way back to like years and years ago. Like we haven't tried this kind of stuff in a while, and now you're.
I think it's just the idea that you can get the parallax to work better now.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
The big change,
so and obviously like things like Unreal 5 has definitely helped kind of push this stuff along, because you can kind of get a lot more realistic looking environments in a very quick manner. And again, if the environment isn't 100% right off the bat, they can still start filming. They have a very good general idea of what the environment's going to be, what the lighting is, and then you can always go and enhance things later in the future when in post and stuff. But it's also it's also a lot more demanding at early stages of the project as well, right? Because now you have to spend 3 to 4 to 5 months or 6 months doing an environment before they even start filming, and you just kind of.
I don't know. Do you think that's a bad thing? Because that means that they have to make choices before
you would hope that they would make them make choices, but unfortunately it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes they'd like to change their mind still, and then you have to figure out how to fix that problem.
I think that's a sign of a bad filmmaker. So we will.
Lazy filmmaker, we worked with so many. I'm sure you probably have too. Like so many different supervisors and stuff, or like clients that they think they know what they want, and they kind of see it all put together, and you're like, you know what, this isn't quite working, and they want to try something different, and you're like,
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Just because they know
maybe
they
sometimes
can,
you look at it and you're like, yeah, I could have told you that a while ago, but we just we had to get through this process. Or sometimes you're like, yeah, I kind of agree, it was a good idea, but it just didn't turn out the way you thought it would. And so you would, yes, I think that some places and some filmmakers definitely have the vision, and they can kind of make sure that it's locked in, and they're like, okay, I like this, and then maybe there's some minor tweaks you have to do later on some of the shots, but they'll generally keep it the same, and that's a huge benefit for everybody because it kind of locks them in. But unfortunately, there's still the ones that like to change their mind 1,000 times before the movie comes out.
Of course. Yeah, I'm actually very fascinated by that. I've actually been looking into virtual production, both in the LED wall as well as the traditional virtual production with camera and object and character tracking. I'm looking at how that can be enhanced even more through real-time ray tracing. So that's been my thing I've been looking at
interesting
in the last several years. And it's been always asking questions about like, well, tell me your experience with virtual production and how is this, and like just a workflow. So it's good to hear from you. Like, yeah, this is pretty good. It's like, I want to try to see what we can do to get
no, absolutely. I am curious to see how far it can really go too, and I do want to spend some more time doing some research on it and like looking into it. Unfortunately, like a lot of times where you're kind of always busy on shows, it's hard to get that time to go and do that. But it is very interesting technology to see where that goes and how far they can really push it.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, I know we can't talk about your next project. Can you mention anything about it? Are you doing environments? Is it invisible effects? Is it big shabam effects? I mean, or
you know what? I would love to give a little insight on it, but I just also don't want to.
Let's play it safe. Let's play it safe.
But we'll put it this way: I think it's a really, really cool show that we're working on currently, and I think that it's going to be pretty exciting when some information comes out about it.
Okay. Well, can you give us a tentative idea of the release date so we can be happy to know about that?
You know, I actually don't even know tentatively the release date.
Oh,
I know
because it's streaming, right? It's a streaming project.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And the streaming ones, they don't have as tight a deadline, or they don't have to do theatrical releases. And
no, it's like basically until they decide to put out a trailer. They could be whatever day, and a lot of times you still don't even know. I mean, I remember listening to a podcast with Jason Bateman for Ozark, and like he was like having a hard time to even figure out when they were going to be releasing the next or the last episodes, and I'm like, oh man. So they kind of keep it tight-lipped, and so I actually have no clue exactly when they plan to bring it out.
Right.
But I think it's gonna be a really fun project. Like, it's a really fun project to be working on. I think it's gonna be a really fun show to see, and I'm pretty excited for it to come out. But it's going to be a while yet. That's the only thing I can tell you.
It's going to be a while. Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's not anytime soon.
Still early days.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
I wish I could give you a little bit more information. I apologize.
Oh, no, please don't. Of course, I feel like I'm prying at this point. But listen, Mathew, it's been awesome talking to you, and it was great to hear your history. And, it sounds like Scanline is doing really well and succeeding in a lot of great ways, and it's always cool to talk to you guys. Obviously, Chaos has been sort of helping and being part of Scanline's success as much as we can possibly do for you guys, so I'm very happy that we're able to do that with you guys as well. So thanks so much for doing this.
Appreciate it. No, thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it.